The following program is made possible by the friends and partners of GodQuest Ministries.
What could fossils have to do with the gospel? Well, from the CTN studio in Pensacola, Florida, this is the Creation Today show. I'm one of your hosts, Eric Hovind, and I'm joined by Paul Taylor.
And today we've got a very special guest with us in the studio, all the way from Australia. We've got John Mackay with us in the studio again. Welcome, John.
I'll say good day, mate. I got it right. That's right. You got questions? This is your show. Send them into questions at creationtoday.org. We got a lot of great stuff we're going to share with you. Some really cool stuff about polystrata fossils. And what does this have to do with the gospel? I'm real curious how you're going to answer that. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the next couple minutes as we talk to you about creation, the Bible, and the gospel. Well, we are really excited to have a special guest all the way from Australia who's been on a tour for a number of weeks now away from home, traveling and speaking in universities and churches around the world. And so, John, we're really excited to have you on the show today. Thanks for being here.
Good to be back again, mate, and I'm looking forward to sharing some of the fossil evidence.
You got some good stuff.
It is, rock solid.
The rock solid evidence. Well, I'm looking forward to that as well. Before we get to that, and we got a lot to talk about. I was looking at some of his pictures before the show. He's got some really cool stuff to show us. Before we get to that, we wanted to remind you guys about the Proof of God conference. We are just months away now from this conference.
You need to get your applications in. Make sure you're registered for the Proof of God conference, which will be held near Orlando.
That's correct, right in Orlando?
In Florida. So get onto the website, creationtoday.org, or you can have a look at proofconference.com.
Yes.
And there's going to be some great speakers there, aren't there, Eric?
There really are, man. We got, let's see here, I'm losing them here. Mark Spence from Way of the Master, a friend of mine. Carl Kirby from Reason for Hope Ministry. Man, he's got some great messages. Seitzen Bruggencay from ProofThatGodExists.org. A bloke named Paul Taylor, who's just a fine individual.
You can go to sleep during that one. Yeah.
And then I'm going to show up there as well. And we got we're getting some incredible breakout speakers as well. Lloyd Anderson from the Seven Wonders Museum. We've seen his talk on Mount St. Helens and how it represents what all it shows us about rapid formation, geologic formation, and what occurred at Mount St. Helens.
That's going to be real fun to hear what he has to say as well. And of course, if you're in Washington State, then go and have a look at the Seven Wonders Museum on the way up to Mount St. Helens, as we did not so long since.
It's beautiful, absolutely beautiful. You got to go check that out. Another announcement I want to make you guys aware of: we are moving forward with the Genesis Project. If you want to see some behind-the-scenes footage of what we're doing and how it's going, you need to go to genesisseries.com. That's genesisseries.com to have a look at that. Not to mention, you like speaking in churches as well, don't you, Paul?
I like speaking in churches. I like speaking anywhere. And remember that if you want to book either Eric or myself, then you can get onto our website and you can book us. People often email in and say, "Why haven't you come to speak in X yet?" And the reason is because there isn't a church in X has invited us yet. So if you live in X, wherever that is,
right.
then get on to us and we will be there. We'll speak at your church, at your event, and we would love to do so. And also you'll find, if you go to our website and look at the events page, places that we are speaking, events that are coming up.
Okay, now what do fossils have to do with the gospel? That's what we're going to find out from John Mackay.
You know, John, many years ago, I remember hearing you speak, too many years ago, and I care to remember, really. When,
You mean before my grandchildren called me a fossil?
When Eric was probably still knee-high to a grasshopper. And I remember you talking about Joshua going over the river, and Joshua got the people to bring stones together and put them in a pile, didn't he? And of course, what he wanted then was for people to say, when your children say, "What do these stones mean?" then you can tell them, well, that's to do with God bringing us out of Egypt.
Yeah, it was a testimony to history, to what God had done.
Now, your argument, if we want to, or really the illustration you were using, is that basically fossils are pretty similar in a sense to
They
us.
really are. I mean, when I first got involved in this, it was because an evangelist came and saw me and he said, I do a lot of work in schools, and 9 out of 10 students are saying, why are you bothering telling us about Jesus Christ? We know Adam and Eve aren't true. And their logic was millions of years of fossils prove evolution. The lecturer has said so. The teacher has said so. The textbook has said so. And he said to me, you're Mr. Geologist, you're Mr. Science, what do I say? And so I said, Lord, you better help me find out what to say.
So we're saying then really that a fossil is almost really a gospel tract in a sense, because it's a record there of the flood.
Well, it's a record of the brilliance of God as the creator who made things to produce after their kind, and secondly, you only get fossils when they're buried real fast. And I brought a lot along to show today. Normally I carry them in my pockets, but the first lot are too big for me to do that.
Now, before we get into seeing some of these pictures, you are a geologist. That's what you got your degree in, and you actually...
I trained in geology and I trained in education, so I've done the gamut and wandered around the globe for the past 30 years digging up dinosaurs and fossils of this, that and everything else, including my favourite polystrate trees.
Wow. And you weren't always a creationist either.
No, I was at university before I even began to doubt the theory of evolution.
Wow.
And it was really the textbooks. We had a textbook by Professor Carter, and I keep telling people this, that Carter, professor from Oxford, you know, not the Oxford, Mississippi, the real one. You know.
The official Oxford.
Yeah, that's right. And he would tell us that, you know, here's all the wonderful diagrams of how evolution's supposed to happen, but at the end of every chapter, you can't see this in the rocks. And okay, one chapter I can understand, 2, but I've got a pretty good memory, and I would memorise the pages, and the last page gave a summary of the whole book. And he said, once the fossils appear, they appear suddenly and they seem to be inherently stable. And I thought, well, if that's the case, why do I believe in evolution? Why am I struggling? So I thought, I'm going to go and find out what all the evidence is. And, well, you can see I've been finding evidence for quite a long time. And after 30 to 40 years of digging up rocks, Carter is right. The fossils show stability after their kind, in other words, just like the Bible says. And, of course, we'll bring up rapid catastrophic burial in a moment as well.
Man, okay, I got to see some of these pictures. What do you got for us?
Okay, well, I'm going to turn on my data projector here. We're going to take you to Australia. You can see the big red arrow there, Paul. Oh, sorry, big yellow arrow. And that's where we're going to start. There's me with one of our Australian polystrate trees. You can see people need to send donations. We geologists need better clothes than that. But it was hot in the middle of summer. And, of course, there's the most famous ones in the world, the ones that Charles Lyell and Dawson and the others found in Nova Scotia. Joggins is the place. But since then, I've been to places like Washington. There's one of my most recent ones. Here they are. You can see the tree just standing up there, but it's buried in basalt. And of course, the interesting thing is the tree had to be absolutely saturated to survive that, because basalt's at 1,000 degrees, so it's been underwater. And of course, if folks are wondering what polystrate means, Kentucky, you know, where they all talk like that. Sorry about you folks in Kentucky. But you can see my colleague Bob Powell at the bottom. It's not the best picture of him. You can just see the back of his head. Bob's one of our geologists here in the USA, and you can see I've got the word strata marked out, and hence polystrate. It goes through many strata. We're on the border of Tennessee and Kentucky, and the thing that's always fascinated me about these is many of the ones that I've dug up have no roots. Now, you don't have to be Einstein to figure out the fact that if they have no roots, they didn't grow there. If they didn't grow there, they grew somewhere else. If they grew somewhere else, they've been picked up, carried along, dumped, and buried before they fell over.
Unbelievable.
But here's the most exciting one. After a big landslide, I noticed this little bit of a fossil tree poking out, so we got up and we cleaned it up a bit. We filmed it all because these things do have a habit of eroding with time. And as I cleaned it out, I noticed one spectacular thing. See where the red arrow is marked?
Yes.
I got the colour right this time. I noticed that the leaves were still attached to this tree.
Wow.
Unbelievable.
Right, now you live in a country where trees every year lose their leaves.
Yes.
And you know how long it takes for those leaves to fall off.
Not
So
long at all.
these trees did not take long to get buried. They were buried before the leaves fell off. And so I've been challenging people around the globe with two things. One is, how did you get this fossil into the rocks? Two, how long did it actually take? Because there's so many people out there that say the Bible couldn't possibly be true because it says in 6 days God created, and the rocks show millions of years.
It's what they say all the time.
It's been really encouraging over the years to actually see many of these things that God has blessed us with.
Wow. This is fascinating information. I love this stuff. Now, are fossil trees, is that all we find, or is there other stuff?
Oh no, there's lots of other stuff. There's even fossil people and fossil dinosaurs and fossil trilobites, but we'll get to those today.
Let's talk about that in just a minute. Those will be coming right up. But for now, we need to take a short break.
Join Eric Hoban and Paul Tater from CreationToday.org, along with Carl Kirby of Reason for Hope Ministries, Mark Spence of The Way of the Master, and Cy Ten Bruggencate of ProofThatGodExists.org for the Proof of God Conference in Orlando, Florida. For more information, visit ProofConference.com. That's ProofConference.com, or call toll-free 1-877-479-3466.
The Creation Today show would like to thank Category 5 TV for being so generous in airing our program. It's donations from people just like you that allow Category 5 to keep the data streaming to your computer, TV, or tablet. If you haven't had a chance this week, pop on over to patreon.com/category5 and take them out to eat, so to speak. It would mean the world to them, and you get the blessing of giving in return.
Welcome back. You're watching Creation Today with me, Paul Taylor, and with Eric Hoven and our very special guest, John Mackay. And we've been talking about polystrate fossils, and we've been talking about lots of information about fossils, and of course there's lots more information that you've got, John, that we can't sort of fit into the program. And where should people go if they want to find out more of the information?
Okay, well, we've set up our creationresearch.net website, and you just go to the front page, click on search, and then under evidence search, put in words like trees or polystrate. That's Polystrate. Polystrate. And so creationresearch.net, and you'll see lots and lots of exciting pictures on things like that.
And of course, another thing is that we take questions on this show, and of course, you take questions too. And if people want to ask you a question, John, then they need to go to askjohnmackay.com.
That's correct, Ask John Mackay. And by the way, you say Mackay over here, we say Mackay. You say tomato, we say tomato. You know, so that's the way it goes.
And of course,
somebody's got to be wrong.
Yeah. And other information about the polystrate fossils is found on the DVD Darwin on the Rocks,
which you did, which was an incredible
That's
DVD.
Right. We actually started over there in Nova Scotia on that DVD, and we took you all through the evidence that even Darwin saw. And actually, we used the term Darwin on the Rocks because English is such a wonderful language. It has so many meanings. As I keep telling people, you need a lawyer to prove what you actually said. But Darwin on the Rocks, of course, year of the Titanic celebration, shipwrecks. Evolution is shipwrecked by all of the rocks and fossils, and particularly the polystrate ones.
Wow. Okay, so you're telling us though that fossils have something to do with the gospel. I mean, you gave that verse, Paul, about the rocks will cry out. Go into that real quick. I mean, how is it that fossils have something to do with the gospel?
Could anyone actually be saved by seeing a polystrate fossil?
Okay, remember I started out by saying an evangelist came and talked to me and said, I'm trying to witness to students, and 9 out of 10 of them are saying, you're irrelevant. You know, we know the Bible's not true, and their chief argument was that the fossils, the millions of years, the theory of evolution, right? That was their chief objection. He said, we didn't learn how to handle that at Bible college, so it should be logical if their chief problem is fossils and millions of years and evolution, then if you want to reach them, you have to demolish that barrier first, right? So if you're talking to, say, Muslims, they don't have that problem because they've got a Quran that says God created, so you don't even need to defend creation. creation. You just need to talk about who Jesus is. Is he God or is he not God, right? But with the majority of Americans or Australians or British, you have to discuss the evidence why the rocks don't speak out millions of years. Paul asked the question, has anybody been saved? And I'm always thrilled. I'll put up a picture now of these two. Now, I met Dave at a meeting, never seen him before in my life, and his wife Jill was there, and you can see I took the picture and they're smiling. And Dave shared with me their testimony that he was a policeman, worked day shift. She was a nurse, worked night shift. Pretty rough sort of lifestyle.
Yeah, how do you...
They'd been married. He was a sort of non-committed Christian and she was not a Christian at all. So their marriage was on the edge of breaking up. You know, a recipe for disaster. And anyway, Jill came home one night after doing night shift. Dave was already asleep and she switched on the TV and there's me. Right? I thought, okay, all right, Lord, thank you for that. But what I was talking about was polystrate trees.
Wow.
Just like the pictures I've just showed you, right? And the most important evidence to realise is if you've got a tree that's, well, the biggest one I've dug up is 30 metres or 100 feet.
You're
right?
kidding me.
Nope. And if you have trees that go 30 metres through the rock, then the following logic is obvious. Number one, it was buried in less time than the tree takes to go rotten.
That's true.
Number two, all those layers didn't slowly get there one on top of the other. They had to get there in less time than the tree took to rot.
Yes.
Okay, why wasn't Jill a Christian? Problem, the world is too old. The Bible couldn't possibly be true. 6 days of creation, she knew what Genesis was about, you know, and the problem was she thought the evidence came from the rocks. And within 20 minutes she was saying, hang on, if that 30 metres got there like that, then even the Grand Canyon doesn't need millions of years. And by the morning she'd abandoned millions of years of evolution, picked up a Bible and got saved.
Wonderful.
And so when people ask me, look, this is they state this is an irrelevant issue, I say, well, hang on, it may be irrelevant to you, but what about all the people who think the Bible is false because of the millions of years, e.g. Jill? But it gets even better, so don't go away out there, folks, because Dave was really challenged by this. Number one, their marriage was saved. Number two, Jill is now a Christian, so he's equally yoked. Number three, he's been a pretty lackadaisical Christian, so he's really challenged by what the Holy Spirit has done in his wife. So he thinks, okay, this guy, creationresearch.net, I'm going to get some of their DVDs and I'm going to hand them out to the people I work with. Who was he working with? He was employed by the government to work with recovering drug addicts. Now, if you've ever worked with recovering drug addicts in a government program where you're not allowed to share Christ, where you're not allowed to share anything biblical, you know the success rate is just about
almost
zero.
Nothing.
So Dave ignored all of that. And so he starts handing out DVDs, and when I spoke to him, when I took this picture, he said in the last 18 months we've had 3 drug addicts saved and none of them have gone back to drugs. And the reason is simple, the God who created the universe has no trouble fixing up a recovering drug addict.
Because that's actually working on the real heart of the issue. The real transformation is not what can I do, it's what can God do in you.
Yeah, and I'm going to put up a Bible verse because this struck me many years ago. And as Paul knows, because he heard me preach on this sort of stuff many, many years ago in England. In fact, as I keep telling people, you know, I've been a Christian now longer than Moses was in the wilderness. So I've got to know Jesus really well, and I've got to know the fact that when he says something, he means it. What he means, he says, and he says it in such clear words you can't miss it. So here he says in Luke 16, if people don't believe Moses and the prophets, they won't believe even if one rose from the dead. 2 uses there. Moses, go to Deuteronomy, where Moses said, look for a prophet just like me. If you want to reach out to the big Muslim population here, you need that verse because they call Muhammad the prophet, right? So you can ask simple questions like, where did Moses grow up? Egypt. Where did Jesus grow up? Egypt. Muhammad never went there.
Wow.
Simple. You don't need thorough exegesis of the Quran or anything, right?
Just present a simple basic
truth from Moses. But of course, Moses is Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and what Psalm?
Good question. You caught me. Psalm 104.
Psalm 90, actually.
Psalm 98, yeah.
5 points to Eric.
Thank you. Yes, I'm winning.
So what you'll find is when people cannot accept anything in Moses, number one, they reject the fact that God created the world good, so they're always looking for somebody else to blame. Number two, they reject the fact that we're the sinners. They want somebody else to blame. Number three, they reject God's right to judge because there isn't any God, because the world evolved, so therefore we don't have to worry about judgment coming up, so therefore they're not concerned about needing a saviour. End of argument about the relevance of fossils.
It is incredibly relevant to make sure that, wow, this is cool. Well, I know that we've gotten a lot of testimonies that have come in to our ministry, and I'm sure you can, that's not the only one you can point to. I'm sure you have others that have come in of people saying, God used that in my life to help me see the truth. And that's what this is all about. That is the point. All right, more with John. I want to get to some more of these other polystrate fossils and what they could mean other than just the trees. We'll do that right after this. You're watching the Creation Today show with Eric Hovind and Paul Taylor, and our special guest today, John Mackay, all the way from down under, former evolution geologist turned creationist, and now for more than a decade, more than 2 decades, more than 3 decades.
It's no need to go into the age of the earth.
Has been studying creation evolution and presenting it all over at churches and schools. And you just got done with a trip, or you're on your trip right now. You've already been away for 4 weeks.
Yes.
Traveling to...
Well, I started in British Columbia at minus 25 degrees.
Oh,
so
my goodness.
I think I just about sonic boomed as I got out of the...
So coming down here to Florida is definitely a pleasant trip. Tell us what you've been doing, because you were recently involved in a debate series that was filmed, and then a post-debate kind of email exchange.
Yes, that's
like
correct. One of the professors who got us involved, and Paul, you can hold that up, because we just released a DVD called Design of Life. This guy's just come on board with creation research, creationism in general, and Professor Ed Neeland is the professor of synthetic chemistry there, and his job is to make molecules. And of course, one reason he's now convinced God made the world in just 6 days is if you try and make an organic molecule or get anything close to living things, then you have to do it real fast. Right? Because otherwise it starts falling apart.
Oh, wow.
And so therefore, you know, not only is it a great DVD on the evidence in just the molecules that God has used, it's great to see a professor taking a stand.
Wow.
And he's not actually all that popular, so pray for Professor Ed Neeland.
Okay. Yeah, I can imagine, just like we've seen the movie Expelled and things like that, you start questioning evolution, and I'm sure you face this as an evolution. You start questioning it, and they want to get you out of the system real quick.
That's right.
Wow. Well, we've been looking at polystrate fossils. These are fossils that are running up through several layers of rock, and according to the evolution worldview, these layers were laid down over long periods of time. So you're talking, I mean, an approximate to get, 1 million years gets, in their worldview, gets how much sediment, or does it vary?
Well, it varies, but usually they talk about, if you've got a strata, then the lifespan of the animal that's in it is the least amount of time you would have taken. So if you've got a creature like a dinosaur that lived for 100 years, to bury it, you've got to have at least 100 years for its life. Right? And followed by how long it took to get buried. So they add up the lifespans as well as the time, so they end up with vast ages.
Huge ages. Yeah. And like this tree that you dug up that's 30 meters, about how many layers of rock is that going through?
Oh, thousands. Thousands.
Oh, my goodness.
Right, thousands of layers.
So, I mean, it's pretty obvious, isn't it, that the tree was just stood there, slowly rotting away while the sediment built up over millions of years.
And millions
Except the top end of the tree is just as well preserved as the bottom. So I lost confidence in the millions of years long ago.
So really, the evidence is not the reason evolutionists are evolutionists.
No, their reason, by and large, if you pin them to the wall, is they don't want a God who created, who therefore has the right to judge.
That's what it really comes down to.
And of course, we're quite familiar with polystrate trees, and it's always spectacular to find them. And I remember you finding one, and when I lived in South Wales, and you finding one on the coast in southwest Wales. So it's always fascinating to see those sort of things. But of course, you were telling us before that it's not just trees that are fossilized across layers.
No, let me show you some more. There's geologist Bob Powell again. We're in an old coal mine. You can see the vertical tree there. But what was fascinating about this coal mine was there were polystrate everythings.
Right.
So you can see the stem of a fern there, and we know it's a fern because I excavated it.
Isn't
that beautiful?
Me.
Yeah,
Just
wonderful.
I mean, that's a beautifully preserved fern. And there's another one. There's the layer. You can see the orange layer. You can see the fern going diagonally. There's a stem going across multiple layers, and I took you before to this tree, but you can see all the layers there. Let's get closer up. These are layers in which, when you pull them apart, there are leaves as well.
Between.
But what's interesting is you ask, what's the white stuff in between the leaves? And microscopically, it turns out to be diatoms, microscopic sea creatures in water. That's right. And here's my most fabulous discovery, polystrate-wise. Vertical leaves across thousands of layers of microscopic diatoms. And you know one thing, you can't argue the diatom layers took so long to get there, because the average evolution says it takes sort of like 100 years to get a teaspoon of the things, because there's millions in a teaspoon.
They're so small.
They're so tiny, that's right. But the bottom end of this leaf is the same age as the top end of the leaf. So therefore, that whole tree got there really, really quickly. So I love to challenge people. You say millions, show it to me. It's not here.
Microscopic sea creatures that live in the leaves of trees.
Something's wrong, don't you think?
Yeah, or perhaps the tree got wet. Something made the whole tree get wet as it got buried.
Let me show you some of the others we've got into our collection. Here's one of the field trips I run, because I run these all around the world. The rocks, you can break them open. You can see what looks like trilobites. That's what you say over here. We say trilobites.
Trilobites.
Okay, there's one from this area here, and you can see there's a three-dimensional impression here.
Wow.
It's in microscopic layers. You dig even further and you start to get really thick trilobites out. And look at this one. He's got his eyeballs on stalks.
Oh my goodness.
Now, all of these are now in our Creation Research collection, and you can see many of them. Creationresearch.net for many of them, and go to our web museum. Go down the left-hand side, click Museum, and look at this guy. Now, when you go to bury a trilobite like that, it has to cross multiple layers. So basically, by definition, it's 3D, it's polystrate, and of course, because that's so well preserved, and it's also starting to roll up, you know, it was buried frightened, because the only relatives of this guy today are the little roly-polies. You know, you touch them.
Right, they climb up.
These guys were buried frightened.
And they're flat.
Buried in water, and catastrophically, suddenly, and they, from the start to the finish, they produce after their kind. The rocks cry out the praises of God, who has always been the same.
If you didn't know any better, you'd think there was a worldwide flood, exactly like the Bible said. But some people get educated beyond common sense, unfortunately.
Such a shame.
Well, that is our show for today. We're going to ask John to stick around and see if we can have another show next week. So look forward to next week. What can we talk about next week? We got more stuff, right?
We got lots more stuff. I've found some lovely fossil thorns.
Oh.
And we're going to discuss the significance of those.
We'll talk
fossil
about that.
spikes, etc. Yeah, great
next
stuff.
week. If you have questions, send them into questions@creationtoday.org. Of course, you can join us on Facebook and Twitter.
Yes, Twitter is @CreationToday.
That's right.
Facebook.com/CreationToday.
So lots of great stuff. We want to thank you guys so much for joining the Creation Today show, and hope you're always learning more that'll help you further the gospel of Jesus Christ. God bless.
This program is available on DVD by visiting creationstore.org or by calling 877-479-3466. To order this episode, use the item number displayed on your screen.